Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about astrology and autism. Now, autism, according to cdc.gov, is, quote, developmental disability caused by differences with the brain, end quote. There can be difficulties with social interaction and general communication with others. Now, first off, I'm going to talk about some basic fundamental things in the natal chart that may be indicators for autism. Now, Mercury, which rules the brain and communication if it's afflicted, Mercury, some examples, Mercury retrograde and or in the 12th house of restrictions, Mercury in its detriment in Sagittarius or in its fall in the sign of Pisces. I should say, sorry, detriment and fall in the sign of Pisces. Mercury intercepted as well. Mercury strongly afflicted by adverse aspects. Mercury in adverse aspect to Saturn can suggest communication being restricted or requiring more of a laborious effort. It can also manifest in delays in communication. If Uranus makes an adverse aspect to Mercury, as an example, that could indicate sporadic or intermittent communications. Mercury making an adverse aspect, let's say as an example, it makes an adverse aspect to Jupiter. That may indicate possibly misconstruing, misunderstanding, like abstract thoughts. I would say that would be in an example, and we have to do looking at this as well. Looking at again going back to Mercury, making an adverse aspect to Jupiter, that could indicate a misunderstanding of abstract thoughts, such as taking those ideas in a more literal manner. Mercury making an adverse aspect to Pluto may suggest compulsive or obsessive thinking patterns. If Mercury makes an adverse aspect to the Moon, that may suggest difficulty in understanding emotions. Now, I believe Uranus can play a role in autism as well, because the planet is associated with neurological disorders. Let's say an afflicted Uranus can be an indicator of this. Going back to Mercury making an adverse aspect to Uranus, both have a connection. Both those planets have a connection with neurological issues. If they are involved in an adverse aspect with each other, I would say that could be an indicator that could suggest an unorthodox way of learning, which could be a symptom of autism. I believe the condition of Venus can factor into autism as well. Again, people with autism can have difficulties with social interaction. Venus is connected with sociability. A strongly afflicted Venus may indicate difficulty with socializing with others. Now, if Venus makes an adverse aspect to Uranus, as an example, there may be difficulty in socializing with friends or groups. It may also suggest or be a sign of socializing sporadically. Now, I would say too, planets that are in the third house, can factor in as well. If you have, say, as an example, let's say, because third house is the house of learning, assimilating information, and communication. And if Saturn is in the third house, as an example, that may be a sign of some kind of blockage or restriction in communicating. If Uranus is in the third house, that may manifest in learning and assimilating information in a more, like could be an unorthodox or different manner than most people. Now, the first house in astrology governs the brain. And certain planets, in the first house or conjunct the ascendant may affect the functioning of the brain. Uranus in the first house may indicate something unusual or different connected with the brain. If Neptune is in the first house, that could suggest a gradual, dissolving, dissipation, or deterioration of brain functionality. Now, I would also say that the North Node can play a role in this because the North Node reflects qualities that one is trying to develop. If the North Node makes a negative aspect to Mercury, hard aspect to Mercury, it may suggest difficulty in developing abilities associated with thinking and communication. If the North Node makes an adverse aspect to Venus, it may be more difficult for the person to develop ability for social interaction. Now, what I want to get to now is I want to talk about some symptoms that are associated with autism and, astrological placements that may be connected with it. Now, some people, with autism may experience, limitations and interests. If Jupiter is afflicted, the person may have difficulty in expanding horizons. If Taurus is prominent in one's chart, that person may have, some difficulty in broadening interests. If someone has, let's say they have all their planets confined, in a small span of degrees in their chart, that could be an astrological indicator of limitations in their interests. Saturn in the ninth house may have difficulties in expanding horizons. So now another symptom of autism is basically, I guess you could call it repetitive or redundant behavior. If the sun makes an adverse aspect to Pluto, that could indicate compulsive actions. If someone with Saturn in the sixth house may be a person that's very rigid as far as what they do in their daily routine. Pluto in the sixth house may be obsessed with what they do in their daily routine. Another possible, symptom of autism can be, difficulty in making eye contact with others. Now, if the sun and the sun and the moon in astrology, they're associated with the eyes in astrology. The sun rules the right eye in males and left eye in females. The moon rules the left eye in males and the right eye in females. The sun is also about our focus. If the sun and or moon makes an adverse aspect to Uranus, that may suggest difficulty in eye contact with friends and people that are in groups. If the sun, now let's say if the moon makes an adverse aspect to Venus, there may be difficulty making eye contact with that marriage partner or significant other and even important friends. Now, the maximum distance the sun can have from between the sun and Venus, I think, is like 48 degrees. So you don't have, any major adverse aspect that can occur between those two planets, but you can have the semi-square, and that may cause, some difficulties, with eye contact. Some cases with people that you're in relationships with, and close friends, or the marriage partner / significant other. Now another thing is another potential symptom of autism can be a very strong anathema or aversion to change. The nature of the person with autism can sometimes be extremely called intransigent or immutable. Someone with a dominant fixed chart may have difficulty in making a major change. When I say, I'm going to elaborate on that, when I say dominant fixed chart, what I'm talking about is having the majority / preponderance of major astrological influences in fixed signs. Now, let's say if there's a fixed T-square or fixed grand cross in the chart, that may make this more taxing and cause more tension and exasperation. Well, I want to close with saying, that just because somebody has, one of these aspects or placements, or one or more of these aspects or placements, doesn't mean that they're definitely going to have autism. Some people, may have multiple placements that I described. and not have autism. However, the more of these placements a person has, that could indicate a greater propensity for having autism. And I'm just really, in this video, I'm just talking about proclivities toward autism from an astrological standpoint. Anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment. Until next time, Edwin Learnard saying stay well.